Triss or Yennefer? For over 5 years, I've avoided what has to be the most heated topic of debate in the Witcher community. That is at least based on the comment sections of my videos. And in addition to the endless arguments, I have also been asked many times about which of the two I prefer, what I think about them, and so on. While I do not really have a favorite, I kind of like and dislike both of them for different reasons, and so I decided to finally make a video about it. I will attempt to hopefully dispel some myths and settle some arguments, although I'll probably fail. I will also address the popular pieces of criticism against both Triss and Yennefer, and more so about Triss really, simply because, again, based on my comments, she is definitely the one that has received more negativity. Some people frankly hate her, possibly for good reasons, but we'll get to that. Meanwhile, Yennefer is usually the one that most of my viewers prefer, but she too gets her fair share of criticism, and so we'll have plenty to talk about her as well. I'll try to look at the two sorceresses both from Geralt's perspective and from that of the readers and players, especially given that the Witcher games are RPGs after all, and we'll see how it goes. I urge you to watch the whole video before commenting, though I suspect some of you may have already done it, but that's okay. And of course, I gotta warn you that this video will contain pretty big spoilers about Triss and Yen, as well as the Witcher books and games. So sit back, get your pitchforks out, and let's begin.
Deepest apologies, but I must ask, is this about love?
First off, I'd like to talk about love, specifically love as portrayed in the world of The Witcher. In short, it's not the pretty thing that we know from fairy tales. It does actually exist in a similar way, as in, it can be used to break curses and whatnot, but the people who love each other are often known to hurt each other, to be unfaithful, very unfaithful in some cases, also to use each other, and even be willing to kill each other in some cases. So love in this world is full of imperfections, which is arguably more realistic, but to expect anything different in The Witcher 3 would be unreasonable, I think. Okay, the second thing I gotta tell you about are sorceresses in general. They aren't that pretty either, at least not on the inside.
My oh my.
There is a description of sorceresses in the very first book, and it says something along the lines of sorceresses are beautiful women with eyes of angry and ugly little girls. This is actually in the Last Wish chapter of the Last Wish book, where Yennefer appears. And it's true. Generally, they're not really nice people. The only kind of nice one I can think of is Isbel ep Muirmos from Thronebreaker, and ironically she's also the only one who chose not to magically keep herself young. She's probably somewhere between Triss and Yennefer in terms of age, Yennefer being 100-ish in the third game, while Triss is probably half of that. In fact, we don't actually know how old Triss is. She is the youngest member of the Lodge, if I'm not mistaken, and also the youngest looking of them all, though not by much. Yennefer is said to look like a woman in her 20s, while Triss looks probably 16 to 18 or so. If I had to guess her age, I would certainly think she's not extremely young. Based on the way Yennefer treats her and refers to her, as well as the fact that she's not a novice in terms of her magical abilities, I'd say she's at least in her 30s perhaps in the books, if not more, and therefore 40 plus in the games. And ultimately it doesn't matter all that much. So now that the nature of sorceresses and love is out of the way, let's talk a little more specifically about Triss and Yen. Let's start with our dear darling first.
Yes, it's about our dear darling Triss.
There are very few good things about Triss in the books. While I tend to disagree that she is straight up evil, I do absolutely agree that she is selfish and cowardly and kind of pathetic at times. She's also easily manipulated by her superiors, potentially even swayed into some lesbomancy.
My favourite type of magic.
And she's a terrible friend to Yennefer. Although it's debatable if they were ever friends to begin with, but still. She is also obsessed with getting inside Geralt's pants, sometimes to a disturbing extent, and possibly even uses the fact that she is close to Ciri to get even closer to Geralt, which I did not like at all. She has a bit of a redemption, if you can call it this way, in the end, but I didn't think that much of it. It's more like she proved to be a normal person.
How's Yen?
Not bad. Asking about anything specific?
Never mind. I got my answer. How's Yen?
She's fine. Asking about anything?
Never mind. How's Yen?
Don't know yet. Asking about?
Never mind.
And ultimately, Geralt is not terribly interested in having a serious relationship with Triss in the books. In fact, the other sorceress he has the longest relationship with beside Yennefer is Fringilla Vigo. At one point, he even tells her that he kind of loves her. So in terms of Triss in the books, there is hardly a good reason for Geralt or the readers to like her very much as a person. Now, with all of that said, I still think that a lot of the negativity towards Triss in the books is rather exaggerated. So many people call her evil, a treacherous snake, a rapist, and whatnot. And I suppose the treachery part is the closest to the truth, but I'd like to address these accusations quickly. First off, the rape. So, Geralt and Triss have a brief thing that happened at some point in the past behind the scenes. When Triss first appeared, for example, it had already happened and ended. Now, it was said that to help seduce him, she used magic. We don't know to what extent and what exactly she did, but I'm 99% certain that it's not the kind of complete mind control that, for example, Yennefer uses on him. I absolutely agree that this is a bad thing, but at the same time, I think that blatantly calling Triss this way is simply overblown. We know for a fact that when Geralt reminisces of her right before he finds Ciri, he remembers Triss quite fondly. And this is after their thing had already ended. So based on the way he thinks of her, it is highly unlikely to me that she forced him to do something he regrets, or something that he disliked, or that simply felt bad for him in any notable way. In fact, I think she resorted to magic because of a mixture of jealousy and insecurity. Jealousy, of course, of her good friend Yennefer and what she had, and insecurity that she wasn't good enough to get the same thing.
I'm not Yennefer, Geralt. I never will be. I'm sorry.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the matter in the comments. I actually think that there is absolutely no reason why Geralt wouldn't sleep with Triss. I mean, he sleeps with everyone, basically, and Triss is fairly good looking and intelligent, so there you go.
What I want.
As for the accusations of being evil and a traitor, it is true that when Yennefer needed her most, she did not take her side, but instead supported the Lodge. However, I think people criticize her for the wrong reason. I do not think she did it out of malice. She didn't do it because she was hurt over Geralt not choosing her, or to have some sort of revenge against Yennefer, but rather it was because she did not have the spine to oppose Philippa and was just too cowardly and selfish to help Yennefer. Or maybe the lesbomancy was just that convincing. Seriously though, I think if Triss had nothing to lose, she would have helped Yen. However, she simply cared more about her own well-being and position within the structure of power. This is once again clearly not a good thing. It's another point against Triss in my book, but I think she did what she did because she was a self-centered coward and not because she took any pleasure in hurting Yennefer or by extent Geralt and Ciri.
Triss, I can't do this. Can't help.
And it's worth mentioning that Triss does not really fit with the Lodge. She is intelligent, as I said, but she lacks the wisdom and the cunning that is required. And this is even shown graphically in the Witcher games. For example, she's always wearing rather simple outfits, unlike the rest of the sorceresses. She also is the only one, if I'm not mistaken, who has an American accent, unlike all the others who have British accents. Except for the Nilfgaardians, I suppose, but of course they have Elder Speech accents, which are even superior. And while on the topic of treachery, let's talk about Triss in the first and second Witcher games. The main issue that most people have with her is that she uses and manipulates Geralt and takes advantage of his memory loss. This is of course by not telling him who he actually was and what he fought for prior to losing it. Now, other people would defend Triss here, claiming that she knew that if Geralt was reminded of Yennefer, she would have lost all chances of being with him, and so she didn't tell him out of fear for losing him. Which does make sense, but still it's not much of an excuse, especially when considering that, above all else, she didn't tell Geralt about Ciri either. Ultimately, with the story from the books in mind, things do not look good for Triss in the first two games. But I do have a bit of a theory as to what may be going on here. I think that at least part of the reason why Triss did not tell Geralt everything was simply because if she had, it would have been way too inconvenient for the plot of the first two games, and so the developers had her remain silent. Just think what would have happened if Triss had told him. On one hand, it would have gotten in the way of the whole recovering of the memory plot in the second game, and that's basically the reason why we have the entire middle act.
They come to bid you farewell.
My forest. Raphael, Gwynblade. Farewell.
And more importantly, it would have likely caused Geralt to immediately resort to looking for Ciri and Yennefer, which is basically the plot of the third game. So how do you make Geralt do the things that he does in the first two games and also have Triss in these games? Well, just make sure she doesn't remind him of Ciri and Yen. On top of that, Triss is not the only one who could have told Geralt something about his past. Dandelion, for example, knew just how much Ciri meant to Geralt and how much effort he put into searching for her throughout the books. But he didn't really say much about her at all, until we got to the third game and it was already convenient to do so. Vesemir as well. In the first game, when Geralt returns, he could have easily asked about what happened to Ciri. We know just how much he cared about her from the books and the third game. Even Lambert and Eskel, they too trained Ciri when she was young. And of course, all of the Witchers knew about Yennefer, although they were probably not very fond of her. Finally, even in the third game, we can't really bring the topic up with anybody. There's a throwaway line by Triss at one point.
Someone's been taking advantage of me.
I have, for one.
I've never even intimated.
We need to hurry.
But you can't actually accuse her personally, or even ask her more casually about why the hell did she not tell you anything. You also cannot ask Dandelion or Vesemir or any of the other Witchers, and even Yennefer makes no mention of that when she discusses our dear darling with Geralt. It's almost like The Witcher 3 wants to ignore the fact that people could have reminded Geralt of Yennefer and Ciri throughout the first two games. And ultimately, the whole amnesia plot is a little sketchy.
Ah, yes. Your famous amnesia.
You didn't have it?
For a short time only. Once the Emperor's mages got their hands on me, my memory quickly returned.
But I can't blame the developers too much, because given how the books end, I did warn you about spoilers, right? So basically, Geralt and Yennefer die. You could interpret it as though they go into some form of heaven from which they can return or something, but they die. So it's a little hard to continue the story from that point. But CD Projekt Red did it, and I dare say in an amazing way. Given that the author of the books was not involved in the making of the games, I'm surprised at how true they are to the world and themes of the books and how much justice they do the original. But anyway, those were my thoughts on why Triss does not tell Geralt the truth. Probably not entirely because she's a horrible person, but partially because it would have been simply too inconvenient for the story that they wanted to tell in the first and especially the second game. And finally, we get to the third game, where very few people accuse Triss of anything, and for a good reason, I'd say. She is better in basically every aspect here. I still don't like it when she calls Ciri little sis,
Little sis.
and then looks at Geralt and Yen. First off, I never really thought of her as Ciri's elder sister at Kaer Morhen, way back. And second, it reminded me of that thing I said I disliked earlier, where she kind of utilized Ciri to get closer to Geralt. Other than that, for the first time, there is a relationship you can have with Triss which I can actually call a romance. Whereas in the previous games and the books, it was mostly a mild friendship with a bit of sex from time to time, but there was hardly anything that she did that you can truly admire her for, or even like her as a person because of it. And in The Witcher 3, we have some of that. She's finally helping others without putting herself or any of her superiors on a pedestal. She's finally, not thinking with her vagina?
Triss, stop thinking with your vagina and get a hold of yourself. The Witcher will manage.
What I mean is, if you don't treat her well and then attempt to romance her, she will actually not do it, which I think is a big step for her. That's also a bit of a detail you may have missed about Triss actually, but it's true. If you refuse to help her, for example, and then go straight to the inn and change your mind, she will not want to romance you anymore. And of course, she's not afraid to put herself in danger to help you find Ciri. So ultimately, when it comes to our dear darling Triss, the question is, do you buy the fact that people, and she specifically, can change and grow? I think the games are certainly suggesting that this is the case for Triss, definitely in the third one, but even in the second, you remember that part where she's having a private conversation with Philippa? Well, in there, she actually asks her to clear Geralt's name.
At least help me clear the Witcher's name.
Triss, stop thinking with your
So it's up to you to decide whether she's outgrown her past transgressions, which are numerous and serious, or whether she does not deserve a second chance, or is even simply pretending. Like that one time she arguably pretended to be drunk. I haven't forgotten.
I sure hope the other guests don't get drunk as quickly as I did. Oh no. I hear the statues there are entirely
Entirely what?
nude. Anyone follow you?
I don't believe so.
Just in case, you two switch masks.
Okay, and I think I'm finally done with Triss. Now let us move on to Yennefer. She is of course not present in the first and the second game, so it will only be the books and the third game. However, she has much more content in the books than her red-headed colleague. Or should I say, fresh chestnut-haired colleague? And unlike Triss, whose issues are more so in the past, the majority of Yennefer-related complaints are indeed based in The Witcher 3, which makes me think that most of the people haven't read the books, because in my opinion she's actually more likable in the third game. But let us keep things chronological and start with the books. Yennefer in the books is complicated. I did to some extent share my thoughts on her portrayal in the books when I made my Netflix videos. I think the specific one was called Will Netflix Get Yennefer Wrong? And I think that one is among my most disliked videos actually, so it's possible that I'm completely wrong about her. But anyway, what is the problem with Yennefer? Well, Triss had rather specific accusations, but Yennefer on the other hand, minus that Istrid business, gets much more general ones. People say that she's a bitch, she treats Geralt like a dog.
Well, you believe Yennefer will stop treating you like a dog someday. Don't see me laughing.
She's obsessive and possessive, and so on and so forth. And there is definitely truth to that. I was kind of shocked actually when I read The Last Wish, which is the end of the first book, and that is despite the fact that I already knew Yennefer from the third game. Actually, Netflix did that story, but in comparison to the book version, it was fairly mild.
He won't remember much if he's dead. It's a joke.
So it's to be dull jokes after all.
In the books, Yennefer was much more aggressive and insensitive, and I'd say flat out abusive with Geralt. He sought her help, because he thought that his friend Dandelion was in real trouble, dying potentially. And she basically humiliated him, and then, after letting him know that she can easily make him lick her boots or even other things without magic, she ended up mind-controlling him to get him to do her dirty work.
Yen, told you already, I lost my memory.
And I've lost my patience!
Afterwards, he ended up in prison, smelling like piss and shit, and as a result, he fell in love with her. And wished to be with her always.
Oh, she's really not in the mood.
And thus began a long relationship where they would get together briefly, argue, have sex, and separate. And then, a year or two later, they would meet again, argue, have sex, and so on and so forth. She would sometimes roast Geralt in written form, which was fun. There was also the period where they lived together longer, during which she literally slept with him by night and with another guy by day.
Oh no.
And even considered marrying that other guy briefly.
I missed you too.
Now, things get a little better eventually, but the interesting question, I think, is why is Yennefer like that? And what I find even more interesting is that we don't have a clear answer. Normally, with characters like hers, you'd have a big revelation at some point, explaining how she went through something horrible perhaps, and that's why she became who she is now. But with Yennefer there is no such thing. There are subtle hints about her past, but 90% of it is a mystery. And that's a lot, you know, she's old. Now, I always found that kind of exciting about her. And then Netflix got their hands on The Witcher, and the first thing they did was, let's tell Yennefer's backstory. And I was like... But anyway, once again, why is Yennefer like that? Well, I think it's fairly safe to say that it's partially because she has mommy issues, meaning that she wants desperately to be a mom. But even those issues are somewhat unusual. It seems like it's not just that she's an old woman who could never have children, and so she feels bad or empty about it. It's gotta be something more than this, because there are many other sorceresses who are in the same boat, so to speak, but none of them seem to have the same issues. I speculated based on the tiny bits of her childhood that we know of, that it may have something to do with Yennefer trying to prove to herself that she can be a better parent than her own parents were, and her inability to do so is constantly bothering her. So there is almost a little bit of a selfish reason behind it. It would seem like the problem is not necessarily the fact that she can't give birth, but rather that she can't be a mother to someone. And further evidence of that, I think, is the fact that Yennefer grows milder as her relationship with Ciri progresses. And speaking of that relationship with Ciri, you can actually tell that Yennefer is trying to get some kind of recognition for being a good parent, essentially. You can tell she really wants Ciri to start calling her mother, she wants the two of them to be very close. However, there's a bit of distance between them, and one that is not there between her and Geralt, for example. They have true chemistry, can I use that word? Their relationship is so charming and so natural, and the one between Ciri and Yennefer isn't quite there. Now, it actually gets smoother and better as time goes on, and I think that is also linked with Yennefer becoming less, whatever we tend to complain that she is. Now, I must admit, I could be wrong about this, like I said before, but it just seems that way to me. Anyway, towards the end of the books, Yennefer and Geralt reunite once more, but at that point, he'd slept with the entire female cast of the books, and especially Fringilla Vigo. I mean, he was plowing her left and right while Yennefer was being tortured, and I just couldn't take their relationship that seriously anymore. Especially after how easily she accepted the fact that he only ever thought of her while plowing all these other women. But okay, that's enough backstory for now. I'd like to tell you why I personally do not like Yennefer as a love interest based on the books. And it's not so much because of her shameless cheating with Istrid, or her usual bitchy streaks, as Lambert would say.
I thought you liked people with bitchy streaks.
So long as they're women.
Then you found the best of them.
But rather because of how strenuous her relationship with Geralt is. I do not like how there's this constant feeling of tension when they're together. They can hardly have a normal conversation without it. You can feel how one is pushing in one direction and the other one is pushing in the other. And instead of trying to go through this period of adversity together, they instead just separate. You know, at the first sign of trouble, they turn and run. So that's not really the kind of relationship I admire. And if I were to ask myself the question, is Geralt in the books happy with Yennefer? He falls in love with her the way she is, it's true, but I still doubt it. And maybe that's the thing. Perhaps love, especially in this world, is destined to make you unhappy. I'm curious what you guys think about this. And speaking of love, I do want to stress that Yennefer truly loves Geralt in the books. Very much unlike Triss, she does get herself in big trouble for Geralt and Ciri, and never really backs down despite the fact that all odds seem to be against her. In the end, it actually gets to the point where she sacrifices herself and dies in an attempt to save him. So she loves him, yes, it's just that she has a questionable way of showing it. Now thankfully, things get even better in the third game, especially if you aren't romancing Triss. And yes, she would still verbally box your ears over how you dress, or what you say, or how much you drink, or in what order you ask questions, but she also gets more supportive and trusting, and there are some quite enjoyable conversations with her. Also, once you save Ciri and reunite with Yen in Blood and Wine, it really seems like Geralt's relationship with her can be a little more wholesome than it was in the books.
Remember, it's an ill bird that fouls its own nest.
Well said, Witcher. You're not only handsome, but wise, too. I feel a bit like the cat that got the canary.
Yeah, and I'm... Damn it, you win. This time.
Ha!
And of course, in The Witcher 3, there is also absolutely no doubt that Yennefer loves Geralt and that he and Ciri are the most important people for her. The question is that love enough? And the answer is maybe. I guess that too is up to you to decide. For myself, I can tell you that I like both Triss and Yennefer in the third game, and I don't really like them in the books. When I say don't like them, I don't mean as characters in general, but as someone to have a relationship with. Yennefer is admittedly a more interesting character than Triss, especially in the books, but that is to a large extent because Triss is simply a smaller and less significant character and has less content. And honestly, I find it difficult to choose. Normally when I play, I end up staying with whoever I started romancing first. That is how I ended up with Triss in my first playthrough. I romanced her and I simply wanted to stay faithful. But if you put a gun to my head and force me to choose, well, perhaps I will go for Triss if we only consider the main game. But if we add Blood and Wine, I may be swayed to choosing Yennefer simply because I find her visit in Corvo Bianco quite reassuring. It kind of convinced me that perhaps the relationship will not end up being as tedious as I feared it may be. And also, if you put a gun to my head and force me to say which one I like better visually, physically, I would still say Yennefer. Which brings me to another point. Oftentimes people actually say that players only choose Triss because of how she looks. I never really understood that because I actually like Yennefer's looks better. But if I wasn't limited to these women, I'd probably pick a non-sorceress. And if it absolutely has to be a sorceress, then we may as well go all in and simply choose Philippa Eilhart. I think that would be something. And yeah, I think that's all I had. If anyone is still watching, I thank you for doing so. Don't forget to tell me what you think about all the things I said, although I suspect most of you commented before watching the whole way through. But anyway, thank you very much for watching once again. Special thanks to my supporters on Patreon and my YouTube members. And until the next video, stay tuned and be good.
Shit. Listen, Yennefer practiced black magic.
Yennefer did it.
Yes, 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 come. Yes, 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 come. Yes, 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 come.